Which Baltimore Ravens players have risen their stock so far over the course of the 2023 preseason, and who's fallen out of favor? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Ravens. We're your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making us your first listen each and every day. We're free and available all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is to find the qualified candidates who want to talk to you fast about your job and free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are a 5-day-week Ravens podcast, so news, analysis, updates, post-game reactions, big news reactions. We have it all here for you, both in audio form and video form. It's the same show, so if you want to listen one day in audio form, then watch another day in video form. You're not missing anything one way or the other. I appreciate all the support here. Almost to 5,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is incredible. The audio audience is growing as well. It's been great, and we're ready for football here, regular season football. But before we get to that, we have to go through the rest of the preseason. And throughout the course of the preseason so far, I think we've seen guys step up to the opportunity. Other guys, not so much. They've maybe fallen out of favor. So I want to talk about Ravens preseason risers and Ravens preseason fallers in today's episode. I guess it's another type of twist. You know, we're twisting some, I guess, stock up, stock down, winners and losers. But risers and fallers is more as who's on the up and up, and you know, who also is maybe on the down low and has not been performing well. So we'll talk about preseason risers in the first segment, get into some stats, also do the same thing in the second part of the show with some guys who have fallen out of favor. And then we'll look at the Ravens roster right now, how it currently looks. We'll talk about the Commanders preseason game a little bit more too, and recap the streak being broken. So let's dive into it all here now. Let's start off with some preseason risers. I think there are multiple categories to preseason risers. I think there are obviously guys who have been the best of the best, some of the best players who have played in the Ravens or on the Ravens for the preseason so far. But there's also a category of guys that have made some plays, haven't been necessarily amazing, but have looked fine. I think one of those players is Josh Johnson. Johnson is someone who came into this preseason vying for a quarterback spot, whether it was the backup or the third string if the Ravens do keep three. Feels like Tyler Huntley does have that backup job pretty much all but secured. So it was pretty much Josh Johnson versus Anthony Brown for the final spot on the roster. If, again, there is one, which I assume Baltimore is going to keep a third quarterback because they were the key team in getting that rule passed anyway. Johnson has been a player that has been that almost like a calming, steadying veteran presence for them. He's ended up, if we look at the actual stats here for Johnson, he's completed 18 of 24 passes for 190 yards, 75 completion percentage. So 75% completion percentage for Josh Johnson there. He's thrown for 3 passing touchdowns, has the 1 interception, a quarterback rating of 119.8. He's been someone who I've been impressed with. Hasn't been perfect. He's one of the guys who hasn't been one of the best players on the field for the Ravens, but when he's gotten out there, he's proven that, hey, he can go out there and still play football, and he's been a journeyman, somebody who I think, has earned an opportunity. I think Anthony Brown, he hasn't been as impressive. We'll talk about him in the second part of the show there, but I think some of Baltimore's best players have been the running backs or the running back position, where Justice Hill has been the guy. He's been a guy, one of 2 guys for Baltimore who've impressed me at that position. Justice Hill has 73 rushing yards, 14.6 yards per carry for Justice Hill. 5 attempts for 73 yards for Justice Hill, which is absolutely incredible. Averaging 14.6 yards per attempt is super impressive. I know some people had questions about him coming into the preseason. Well, is he vying for a roster spot? The Ravens signed him to an extension to bring him back. He plays special teams really well. Justice Hill's on this roster. He's a third running back. The battle comes down to the guys like Melvin Gordon, Keaton Mitchell, Owen Wright. I don't put Owen Wright in this conversation whatsoever. It's more between Melvin Gordon and Keaton Mitchell. And again, there's no guarantee that Baltimore actually keeps 4 running backs. But if they do, I think it has to be Keaton Mitchell right now. He's been someone who has shown a skill set that Baltimore just does not have in that running room right now. As I've talked about before, if you're an everydayer, you've heard me talk about this. J.K. Dobbins is like a bruiser type guy, can bounce off of tackles. Gus Edwards, bruiser, can power through. Justice Hill has that bruiser mentality to him, but he has that quickness, that electricity to him. But then you get a guy like Keaton Mitchell, who's averaged 6 yards per carry, 7 attempts for 42 yards, had that 31-yard long run that he had in the Commanders game on Monday. But that box score is deceiving. Remember, because he had that touchdown run, that 30-plus yarder that ended up getting called back by a holding penalty. So realistically, he should be up. I can't do the quick math right now. I'm not that good at math. But he should have probably 8 yards per carry, 9 yards per carry, and a touchdown to his name. He's looked very impressive and is also providing work on special teams. I think Tylan Wallace has definitely had his stock rise a ton throughout the season here. Season, it's been 2 preseason games, but throughout the preseason, he's had his stock rise. Has caught all 3 of the targets that have come his way for 25 yards and those 2 touchdowns. There were questions about the 6 wide receiver spot. I think Tylan Wallace has shored those up. Charlie Kolar had a great game on Monday night, had a bunch of, 2 balls go his way, both really long completions, 4 receptions for him over the course of the preseason for 75 yards. He leads the Ravens in receiving yards this preseason. But Travis Vokolek, 5 receptions for 58 yards, those 2 touchdowns on Monday night. Those 2 guys have had their stock rise tremendously. I think Vokolek a lot more than Kolar, but I still think Kolar is making the roster. Obviously, Zay Flowers is I struggle to put him on these lists because he's good. Like, I'm not going to put it, but he's played, so I guess I have to. Flowers, he's a riser. I mean, people had high expectations anyway, but he's, no doubt in my mind. Offensive line-wise is interesting. John Simpson had a great game against the Commanders. He's been one of PFF's highest graded linemen throughout the course of the season. His stock is on the rise. I think he's all but locked up the starting left guard job. Salah, he has the traits, he has the athleticism. He's just not ready yet. And we can talk about Salah a bit more in the second part of the show. But John Simpson, he's physical. He's a road grader. He has very high football IQ, recognition as well. To me, he's a very smart guy. I think that he is a fine choice for Baltimore. You're not going to have 5 all-pros at those positions. You got to have some leeway to have a guy that's not necessarily a Ronnie Stanley. I think Simpson is fine. He's a solid player, started a lot for the Raiders over the past couple of seasons, and I think that's going to be the guy. So his stock definitely on the rise. Then when you're talking about defensive guys, there are a couple who come into the conversation for me, at least in terms of whose stock has risen the most. I think Delshon Phillips hasn't necessarily had a standout preseason, but he had a standout training camp, had a couple of interceptions back to back. But a guy like Gardarius Washington, tied for second on the team in tackles, he's somebody that I'm very impressed with. His versatility, his ability to find, he's around the football all the time. Both him and Jeremy Lucien have had their stock rise a ton. Lucien playing some corner. He's played a lot of safety now. Both those guys are versatile, and I think while Lucien probably isn't making the roster, he's a prime practice squad guy, and Washington has made a case for a roster spot as well. Other guys who I think have had moments, Malik Harrison has definitely had some. He had that great first game against the Eagles. Kevon Seymour's had some moments too. The Ravens are going to have to rely on him to step up in a big way, and I think he's showing that he can at least be serviceable. I don't know about a top flight corner, but at least serviceable. Travis Jones is, we've continued to see him improve. His stock is definitely on the up and up as well. Malik Ham's stock is soaring right now. Malik Ham is on the rise for sure. Had the forced fumble against Washington, had a sack against Philadelphia. He was going all out, and especially during practice too. He's someone that I think, again, might not make the roster, but is a practice squad guy 100% if he doesn't as well. So those are some of the guys on my list of guys who are risers, who have increased their stock, if you want to put it. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be diving into who maybe has fallen out of favor in Baltimore, whether that's for playing time or roster spot. So be sure to stay tuned. Lots to dive into on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. And Bird Dogs, they make you look good. And I know because I have multiple pairs of Bird Dogs and I love them. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. My nickname is Khaki Kev, or one of them is. So I appreciate Bird Dogs coming through with the stretch khaki shorts. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. And they fit way better than regular shorts that are made of that stiff, restricting cotton. I like feeling free in the shorts and even the pants pants I wear. Bird Dogs does that. They fixed the issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dogs uses this anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. It's actually really cool what they do with that. And if you go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or enter promo code LockedOnNFL, you can get a free white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or promo code LockedOnNFL for a free white tech hat. And that white tech hat is sweet. I have one. I actually wear it out a lot. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, we promise you. We're back, our second part of Locked On Ravens here on this midweek edition Wednesday. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. Now, for these midweek shows, I used to do mailbags. I've just, the past couple of months have been super hectic. I've either forgotten to put out the tweet for the mailbag or I just have not been on top of it. But those are going to come back starting in the regular season. I put out the mailbag tweets right around maybe Tuesday morning, Monday evening. Maybe it comes out Tuesday afternoon, maybe even Wednesday morning sometimes. But I put out a mailbag tweet and you can comment your questions and I'll answer as many as I can get to. I try to answer every one, but sometimes there are a lot and I can't get to, and I don't want to rush through them. So if you want to put a mailbag question, I'll put those tweets out beginning of the regular season. We'll bring that back here. But this week, on this midweek edition today, we're going to continue our conversation. We talked about those preseason risers, but who's fallen out of favor? I think with every good thing, there's sometimes a bad thing, unfortunately. And for some of these Ravens players, the performances haven't been there. There have been mistakes and mess ups. So I want to talk about, again, falling out of favor can have multiple meanings, just like a preseason riser can have multiple meanings. Falling out of favor can mean maybe not getting as much playing time as anticipated. Maybe they're not ready for, a player's not ready for a role that they were expected to get, or they're just roster spot is all but not in the cards for them. So I think for me, Anthony Brown is someone who has probably fallen out of favor there. He has one more week to maybe get Josh Johnson and nip him and say, hey, this is my third quarterback spot. But I think Josh Johnson has it pretty sealed up. Brown has not been overly impressive. I thought he had a much better game, and I don't think you can get much worse from the game he had against Philadelphia in week 1. I thought he played better against the Commanders in week 2, but has a 50% completion percentage, 9 of 18 for 47 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. His quarterback rating is 53.7 compared to Josh Johnson's 119.8, and even Tyler Huntley, who played in the Philadelphia game, his 126.3. So Anthony Brown is someone who I was super high on him coming into training camp, coming into the preseason. I had him rated ahead of Josh Johnson, but apparently he struggled a lot in training camp and has not done anything to surpass Josh Johnson during the preseason as well. I guess if we really want to go like super deep, like into the Ravens roster, which we can, the Ravens, every one of the guys on the roster is fighting for a roster spot. I think Melvin Gordon's stock is down right now. But he hasn't necessarily fallen out of favor. I think Baltimore still really likes him. There's still a question, and I don't think it should be a question, but there still is a question about whether Melvin Gordon or Keaton Mitchell would make the roster if Baltimore keeps 4 running backs. They gave him that partially guaranteed deal with some incentives in there. If they keep Melvin Gordon, I think it is a mistake over Keaton Mitchell. I would be fine with Melvin Gordon on the practice squad. On the practice squad, he's a fine player. He definitely make it there. There's a question of if Keaton Mitchell would make it there or if a team would claim him off of waivers. But Gordon's averaged 3.6 yards per carry. He actually leads the team in rushing attempts with 14. He has 50 yards on those 14 attempts. So he's a player that it would be a fine practice squad guy. But if we're talking regular season roster to start the year, I'm not about that for Melvin Gordon. I think James Proche is probably one of the guys who was falling out of favor. Falling out of favor for him. It seems like his teammates really like him. The coaching staff really likes him, but we have to be honest about what he's done this preseason. It has not been, I don't think there's been one good James Proche play. And I do feel bad for him. Like I actually do. The ball just has not bounced his way. There have been a couple of mistakes that weren't as in control for him. It's not 100% his fault. Like on Monday, he had a part to play in that interception. Don't get me wrong, but the ball was not a great one by Josh Johnson. He's just never been able to put it together. And with Tylan Wallace doing what he's done and his value on special teams as a gunner, I just really don't think there's a spot for James Proche on this roster. Much like Melvin Gordon, I'd be fine with James Proche on the practice squad, but I don't really feel like there's a spot for him on the active roster. Now for Saleh, who I did want to talk about a little bit, I don't think he's fallen out of favor. I think Baltimore really likes him. I think they see a future for him on the Ravens offensive line. The interesting part about this is in the next couple of seasons, Baltimore's going to have to figure out the future of Kevin Zeitler, whether it is he stays with the team for a couple more years. Does he leave? Does he retire? But the Ravens have Andrew Voorhees waiting in the wings. He's not going to play this year after tearing his ACL at the combine. But maybe they can go with a young duo of Saleh and Andrew Voorhees. I think Simpson's probably a one-year player for the Ravens, which isn't a bad thing, but maybe Voorhees fills in at left guard. Saleh can take over for Zeitler at right guard. Maybe that's what happens. And I think Baltimore likes the athleticism, likes the power and just all the traits, the strength that he has. But if you're playing him over John Simpson this year, he's just coming out of college. The scouting report and stuff that was on the tape was he's not ready for the NFL game. He needs a couple of years, maybe a year, to just be around the game, learn, and sit back and watch. And so for me, I think that Saleh is a guy that hasn't fallen out of favor, but compared to when he was regarded as the heavy favorite for the starting left guard job when he was getting those first team reps, I think we're probably past that at this point. I don't know if we were ever there, honestly. I think the Ravens were just trying to see what they had, but I think they wanted to go with the veteran maybe all the way. But I think they still like him. But Ben Cleveland's a guy who his stock, again, falling out of favor. You can use this in a couple of different ways. I think falling out of favor for him, like he didn't play poorly against the Commanders. Like there wasn't any tape. There was not a Jalen Carter rep, and there was not a Jalen Carter on the field for the Commanders in that game. But compared to where we saw Ben Cleveland a couple of years ago and kind of the expectations we had for him, he is not where he was. He's being played at backup right tackle. I think the Ravens are trying to find ways to utilize him in different ways. I think Daniel Faalele is someone who I expected a little more from. Not that he, there were some plays on Monday night where he lost out on a guy due to his lack of quickness. And there was one play that Melvin Gordon actually should have cut back around Faalele, but Faalele got a lot of the flack because he was the guy who was beat. But I was expecting more out of Faalele, and I'm not saying it's like, oh, I'm so disappointed. I was expecting so much more. I was expecting to see him in more situations and just see him pop on the field a little more. I'm still very high on him, but we'll see what his role is for them. I assume they want to kind of develop him a little bit more and figure out what his role is overall. Defensively for Baltimore, guys whose stocks are down, whose guys who have fallen out of favor, I don't really know what the Ravens' plan is with Brandon Stevens right now. He's not falling out of favor. I'm not saying that. But I just don't know what their plan is overall with him, whether it is corner, whether it is safety. He's been playing a bunch of he's listed as a defensive back. They just need to stick him in a position and play him there, and I think that position is safety. I think he is better utilized there. His skill set is better for safety. Baltimore, they've tried the corner experiment a couple times with him after he was a corner, obviously, in college. But I just think at the NFL game, he's better as a safety. Speaking of corners, Corey Mayfield Jr., after his game on Monday night, is public enemy number one in Baltimore right now. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. On the Ravens roster, he's a public enemy number one. I think Sam Cosmi and Joey Sly are a couple of public enemy number ones right now. Nick Gates, another one. Patrick Queen and Ardarius Washington certainly is Nick Gates. But other than that, I don't think there have been a ton of guys who have overly disappointed to the utmost degree. I mean, I guess Caillou Kelly, I expected more out of him. It feels like he's going to need more time overall. I'd say David Ojabo has not fallen out of favor, but his 2 preseason games have been disappointing. But we have to understand with Ojabo, we have to be patient with him. It's his first preseason action, barely played last year. It's expected there are going to be some growing pains, some learning curves, and that's okay. So it hasn't been the scorching start that I think a lot of people wanted to see from David Ojabo for sure. So while I think he's been a disappointment overall in the preseason, I'm willing to admit, and everybody else should as well, that he needs some time, and that was always what was to be expected. Tavius Robinson also. Trenton Simpson, his debut on Monday was not great, made a couple plays, but had a lot of not so good ones. So those are some guys who I think of, falling out of favor, quote unquote, falling out of favor. But stock down guys is another way you can put that. We still have lots to dive into here, though, on Locked On Ravens. We'll dive into how the Ravens roster looks overall right now. We'll continue talking about that Ravens preseason loss to the Commanders and a lot more. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to get to here on the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. And these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. landing jobs to find the right people for your team faster and for free. And me personally, I've had a ton of great experience over on LinkedIn, whether it's looking for jobs or finding other areas where I could be interested in. LinkedIn has a ton of options, and it's super easy to create a free job post over on LinkedIn Jobs. All you have to do is add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. They have simple tools you can use like screening questions to make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience. So you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and who you'd like to hire. And it's really important to start or even end the year strong, and the right team member could help you do that. As why small business rate LinkedIn Jobs number one is delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs is to find the qualified candidates you want to talk to fast about your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to push your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back here rounding out Locked On Ravens on Wednesday. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. Haven't gone anywhere. We have Edgar Allan Poe, the fish in the background, and obviously we have a snail in that fish tank too. So Lamar Gary Jackson is with us as well. And also we got the bird up there, who is a culmination of Locked On Ravens legends in Devonta, Julio Houston, Devonta Freeman, Julio Jones, and Justin Houston. Guys, we talked about probably too much on this show, but did it nonetheless. But let's talk about Baltimore's current roster here. It's something that it's an interesting way that they've kind of formed it. I think they have a lot of depth at a lot of positions. And I think now we can say that even further with the Jadeveon Clowney edition, the Ronald Darby edition. You could also make the argument, but for the corner position, first of all, that's where I wanted to start. With Marlon down, Rocky Ya-Sin down, Arthur Millette down, Jalen Davis down, Pepe Williams down, Darius Washington and Kylie Kelly picking up, I guess, minor injuries. John Harbaugh said there were no serious ones in the Washington game. Baltimore has a ton. I mean, you just look at their roster right now overall, the guys who are listed at corner and the guys who are like defensive backs. Right now, if you're looking at realistic options to make the roster who have a shot, I'm not saying everybody has a huge shot to, but one, I'll just go through and count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. You can go to defensive backs and safeties too, or 13 without the safeties in there. And then you have 14, 15, 16. They have about 17. So anywhere from 15 to 17 guys that could be roster locks or practice squad locks when you consider what the Ravens need at the position right now. There were a couple guys that I didn't include, but for the most part, almost everyone on their roster could be relied upon in a certain way this season. And there are going to be obviously a couple guys who don't make the practice squad. There'll be some handshake deals, but the roster for Baltimore in terms of corner is a lot of players who it's a lot of unknowns. Marlon Humphrey's the only known guy where, yeah, we know Humphrey's going to be a solid option, a really good option when he's back on the field. But how is Rocky Ya-Sin going to adapt? He had struggled before he went down. Guys like Jalen Davis and Pepe Williams and Kevon Seymour and Daryl Worley and Darius Washington, all guys that have potential, but can they do it over a full 17-game season? On defense, there are more of those question marks. Where on offense, it's, Lamar's Lamar. Yeah, you got J.K. and Gus in the backfield. You're good. Odell, Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers. That's a big three. And then you have Mark Andrews at the tight end position. Ronnie Stanley's an all-world guy. Kevin Zeitler is as steady as ever. There are less questions on the Ravens' offensive side of the ball from a personnel roster perspective. Obviously, there are going to be questions about how's the new offense going to gel with Lamar? How's it going to look with Lamar out there and Todd Monken, that pairing? And I'm excited to see it. But on the defensive side of the ball, I think there are more questions from a roster construction perspective. And we saw on Monday night against the Commanders, Baltimore could barely generate any pressure on the Commanders for the most part. And I think that it does a disservice to the secondary. I thought the secondary for Baltimore, obviously it was not necessarily pretty, but there were a lot of plays where we were counting in the Washington quarterbacks. It was 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4, 5. And guys just could not get there. They were wrapping up, but they were missing sacks. They were trying to wrap up, but they would just not be able to get the quarterback down, which has been a theme. So the pass rush and the secondary has to work hand in hand. And it's even more important when you look at Baltimore's corner room right now without Marlon there, the pass rush has to step up. And yes, this is preseason, right? There hasn't been an Afayowe on the field. There's been no interior presence like a Justin Madubuike or Broderick Washington out there. Michael Pierce as well. Jadeveon Clowney hasn't hit the field yet. Ty Spauser's not back yet. But the Ravens pass rush they needed to be consistent, especially early on in the year when Marlon isn't there, so that they can mask some of the inexperience that they have in the corner room. I think Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen help that when you talk about the defensive side of the ball too. I think some of the other veterans on the roster, Marcus Williams, hopefully Kyle Hamilton can take a jump in year 2. So I'm currently feeling pretty good about the Ravens roster when it's healthy, but that's the key, right? When it's healthy is the key. The Ravens seemingly, and over the past couple of seasons, they have not been able to stay healthy, and it has not been a wonderful start, especially in the corner room, to this season in terms of training camp and the preseason. So I wonder what this roster is going to look like at the end of the year. I'm curious. Can they stay relatively healthy? If Baltimore stays relatively healthy, they're a top Super Bowl contender because other teams will get injured. The Ravens will get injured too. They already have gotten injured. But if the Ravens can kind of beat the rest of the league or be right on par with the top teams on the rest of the league that have good injury luck, they're going to be in good position this year. And it's unfortunate when it comes down to that, because I would love to see every team healthy all the time and get best on best. And that's where you prove what you've done in the offseason, the work you put in. That'd be awesome. But it just doesn't work that way. So with a deep offensive system and a deep offensive group at every position, I feel pretty confident in saying that. Except, left guard is the real only one question mark, but other than that, it's deep. Defensively, where mostly you have a lot of guys who you're going to have to rely on to step up in a big way. It's a lot of players that on paper you say, well, yeah, this guy could take a huge jump, but there are going to be guys, and I want to prepare, there are going to be guys that will take that jump and will look great this year. There are going to be other guys that don't take a jump and are far behind what expectations were. So it's a matter of the team being able to balance that both on offense and on defense, even on special teams for a guy like Jordan Stout, for example, and putting it all together. It's not just what it looks like on paper. It's how you translate it over on the field. And so I like Baltimore's roster a lot this year. I think they've done a good job for the most part. Corner still a definite concern, don't get me wrong, but we'll see how it looks at the end of the season. I'm curious to see how it looks and what they've done to shape it over the course of the year. Because it's not done. Obviously, we got cut down day, but they're going to add a couple guys probably and maybe get rid of a few that could be surprises. But that's all I have here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content, so be sure to stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.